Welcome everyone. I'm Nancy Bronstein. I am a Pfaff educator and I'm here today to share some ideas for New Year's decor. Now, before I get started, I would like to say if I have any people participating today that are Jewish, I hope you had a happy Hanukkah. And those of you that celebrate Christmas, I hope you have a Merry Christmas. But we're going to skip right over Christmas, and Hanukkah's already gone by, and we're going to jump right to New Year's. So what I'm going to start out with today is I am going to go over this wall hanging that I made behind me that says Happy New Year. And I'll give you a closer view. This is what it looks like a little bit more closely, and then I'll go in a little bit more, and you can see that there are appliques, there's some fonts going on in there, there's some decorative stitches, and we're going to cover the gamut. So we're going to start with that project. And before I get going, I divided the project into 3 parts. I should go back to the picture, actually. I did the first section. Let's see if I can get my pen to work here. Nope, that's not it. My Apple pen is not. Here we go. Now it's going to work. So I did this section first as far as embroidering it, and then this section, and then this section. I made this top section a little bit longer because I wanted to have a little bit of a decoration at the top. And so this is the top part is in a 360 by 200 hoop. The middle and the bottom section are on 260 by 200 hoops. So you certainly could use other hoops, but just so you know how I did mine. And I started out the design by in the software by adding the fonts, and then I'm going to show you the first part. So first part I did in the software, then the appliques I actually made right on the creative icon. So I'm going to show you both of those things. So I'm going to switch over to the MySewNet software just quickly because it was pretty fast to make the initial design. Then I'm going to go right to the machine. So bear with me a minute while I share my screen. And now I'm in my the MySewNet software. So the first thing I did is I went up to the letter tab so that I could pick a font that I liked. Now I happen to like this font, but if I had said to you, well, I use the Art Deco font, you wouldn't want to have to go through all of these fonts to try to find it. The way that you would most quickly find it is click on Font Manager, and then you could type in art down here and then click enter, and it will show you the designs that have a name that has art in them, like Heart has art in it, and Love Heart has art in it. But I picked the Art Deco 50. So I have my font chosen. Then I'm going to type in the, say the middle section, new. So I wouldn't type in NE because I want it to actually be vertical. So I would type in the N, and I don't need to capitalize it because this is an uppercase font. You know it is by the UC in there. So if I want them to be vertical, I can hold down the Shift key and then hit enter, and then that will drop down so that they are vertical. I don't necessarily have to do that because I could have changed it, moved things around once I got the font on the screen, but that just visually shows me what it's going to look like. So I also want to make sure that I click individual so I can move the letters around individually. Once I make the word new, I want to be able to move the N, the E, and the W to get them where I want them to be. So then I click apply. And now, of course, now they're horizontal anyway. So I didn't really have to make them vertical, but now you know how to do that. So I'm going to go over to the film strip and click on the N, and then I'm going to grab it and pull it up. Then I'm going to click on the E and pull that up. and then click on the W and bring that down. So I would spend some time getting these exactly where I want them, but I've already made the design, so I'm going to just do this quickly. Now I'm going to hold down the Control key so that I can select all three of those letters. I'm going to right click and cut them away. And what happens is that puts them on my clipboard over here for future use. Then I wanted to have a background design behind my letters. So I went to the Create tab and I used one of my very favorite wizards, which is the Quilt Block Wizard. Now the Quilt Block Wizard, you can create designs of different types. You can create quilt blocks where there's a central embroidery and then the quilting is, there's a variety of different types of quilting you can do around the edges of that drawing. Or you can have a shape and have quilting on the inside and nothing on the outside, or the reverse, where you have all your quilting outside of a chosen shape. Or you could just have all cross hatching or stippling or whatever type of quilting you choose. So I'm going to choose the central design and then click next. And I want this to be 260 by 200. And that's actually not the way I want it to be. I want it to be the other direction. So I'm going to put 200 by 260. Then click next. And now this is on my clipboard. So all I have to do is click paste. Then I click next. And my first choice is how tightly I want the quilting to start. And that's a little looser than I would like. So I'm going to go down to the margin and make this, maybe 2 millimeters. Then click, and you see that the quilting then becomes closer to the red letters. And I don't want stippling. I wanted just straight lines, but not quite that close together. So I'm going to go in here and make the gap maybe 3. No, I'm sorry. I want it to be further apart. So let's do 6. And I could change the type of stitch if I wanted to, but I left it the way it was, and I left it that stitch length. So now they're a little bit further apart, and I click finish, and now I have my design. So I took this design and brought it over to the machine and then added applique that I made right on the machine. So I'm going to get out of my sew net here. Just give me a minute. And I'm going to go over to my creative icon. So on the creative icon, actually I need to change my camera here. There we go. So on the creative icon, this is your home screen. Make this a little bit bigger for you. I would go into Start Embroidery. And I have previously put my design in the cloud. So I'm going to touch the cloud here. And here is new. So I can load that. Now, there's a design that I just showed you how to make on the My SewNet software. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just dial it up a little bit. I want to, it's New Year's. We want things to be, you got to have bling on New Year's. That's the one holiday where I think it's mandatory. So we're going to make our own little applique embellishments. I like stars, so particularly on New Year's. So I'm going to go down here to where it says Applique Creator. And what Applique Creator will do is, if I choose the shape, it will make an applique for me. So I'm going to go into my shape menu, and I'm going to choose star. Now it makes a real big star. I don't want it that big. I'll touch one of the corners and drag it down. And then I could go in and choose the way that I want this finished off. And I'm going to choose this sort of shaggy satin stitch. Now I can bring this wherever I want by touching it and dragging it. I can make it kind of curved. I could go in and make it a different star shape. We can, because we have these red dots, those are what are called control points. And those are points where we can alter this shape within certain limits. And you'll see what I mean. When I click positioning down here, it's this first control point function. And I can move this and make this star start to be kind of like almost like a starfish shape maybe, or I could take that back to where it was. I could touch the next control point, and I could do some things where, let's see, what do I want to do? I want to touch over here and make it really a wonky star. But I just went with the typical stars that come right from the shape menu. Maybe that's a little bit big for my purposes. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So that now is an applique. And I could choose to make another one a different size by going back to the Applique Creator, choosing star. I don't have to choose a star, but I kind of like the symmetry of it. And I'll drag that down. I got to get the corner, drag it down, and pull that over here. And touch the circle at the top to make this maybe at a different angle than the one on the left. So I just eyeball it and figure out which, where I want the stars, what size I want them, whatever, on the fly, what makes sense to me. So that I then end up with this, I got to get out of the way, this top panel, or I'm sorry, the middle panel, because that says new on it. And I'll show you the close-up again. Let's see, I got to get to the close-up here. There we go. So that was this section right in the middle there. So that's basically how I did each section except for the top one. Well, the top one, the main body of the top one is the same. I just added the star at the top to give it kind of a, something that kind of designated a little bit extra design on the top part of the piece. And then as we come down to the bottom, you'll see that the bottom two sections are pretty similar. So that's how I designed the piece. Now, I'm going to go over the way that I put it together and the feet that I used and the techniques that I used. But I do want to tell you that you are going to have the ability to download the original design. There's going to be a link in the caption box. And then you can play around with Applique Creator and create whatever appliques you want on there. So I will come back to that, where those are going to be located at the end of the hour. I just want to have a lot of other things that I want to cover first. So let's see, I have a question here. Is this using the Sonnet, or can I just do this on my icon? The first part was the software using my Sonnet, the software. You could do something similar on the icon all by itself. You would choose a font and you would make a panel, the top panel that says happy, and then the second panel that says new, and the last panel that says year. And you can add your own appliques. So basically you could do it on the icon. It'll look a little bit different, but you could certainly do it on the icon itself. It's a little bit faster to have the My Sonnet software, I think, but you can do it on the Creative Icon just by itself. There's powerful embroidery design software inside the icon. There's a lot you can do right on the icon, and it's a matter of whether you have the software, the My Sonnet software or not, and what tool you prefer to work with at a given time. Certain things I find easier to do in the software, but there's certainly many, many, many designs that I do just on the icon itself. Okay, so I made the 3 panels, and then as you can see in this picture, I then put them together with some gray fabric that has little bits of silver in it to add to bring the 3 panels together. And then I added a little embellishment on the sides. So I had some satin cording that I used the 3-hole yarn foot with a decorative stitch on the side to add some bling. And I'm going to show you how I did that. So the 3-hole yarn foot, let me just bring up another picture here, actually. This is the 3-hole yarn foot. And we have the 3-hole yarn foot, and then we also have the 7/9 cording foot. And this foot is very similar, if you look at it, to the other foot. And at first I thought, when I discovered these 2 feet, and for embellishment, I really like these feet. At first I thought, well, why would I need both? You know, they have holes in them, and I could just get the 7/9 hole and just use 5, 3 of the holes, or I could just use the 3-hole one. What's the difference? And I'll tell you what the difference is. When you're looking at the 3-hole yarn foot, you'll notice that the holes are much bigger and they are much wider apart. So this foot is really for doing yarn or for doing something like satin cording, which I'm going to demo. Satin cording is pretty thick. It's even thicker than a lot of yarn. It's for the 3-hole yarn foot. It's probably my go-to is the satin cording. Unless I want a very earthy look, then I'd use yarn. It depends on the application, but more often than not, I use the satin cording. Now with the other foot, the 7/9 hole cording foot, you'll see that the holes are very small and they're very close together. So what that foot is really good for is if you're like me, and once upon a time you were a hand embroiderer and you have tons of embroidery floss, this foot is perfect for utilizing that in your projects. So instead of using the satin cording, you use multiple colors of your embroidery floss, and you can use 7 to 9 different colors and use the decorative stitches like I'm going to show you with the 3-hole yarn foot. So the holes are smaller and they're closer together. So you get a more uniform effect with the floss. If you use the floss on the 3-hole yarn foot, the holes are further apart and they're bigger. So what you'll see are gaps between the 3 strands of embroidery floss. You don't see gaps with the satin cording because it's thicker. Maybe you want those gaps. It's up to you, the look that you're going for. But if you want something that's consistent floss where they're all together, using the 7/9 cording foot works better with floss than the 3-hole yarn foot. It's a mouthful, but I think you see what I mean. So I'm going to demo that. So the 3-hole yarn foot has 3 holes, obviously. And I think that on the instructions, they tell you to thread it from the front to the back. I prefer to do the opposite. What I do is I will tie a knot in the end, and then I thread it from the back to the front. And the satin cording is just the right size with this foot that it pretty much pokes through the holes pretty easily. It does come with a threader. Like some yarns, you will need to use a threader. But the 3-hole yarn foot, you generally don't with the satin cording. So what I like to do is I like to have the knot in the back, thread it from the back to the front, and then pull it up so that the knot is right behind the foot like that. You don't want to sew on the knot. Then I'm going to put it into the ankle. Then I'm going to show you where to find the stitches that are designed for this foot. So I'm going to go back to my home page and go to Start Sewing. And if you go into your stitches, and these stitches are present in most of our Pfaffs that have decorative stitches, and I can't think of one where they're not, but there probably is one. And on the icon, you go to Additional, and it's the stitches that have there's kind of a shaded background as if they're trying to depict the yarn. So it's 9.1.21, 22, 23, and 24. Now, these stitches are designed for this foot, But there are other stitches that would also work, like that stitch would work, and this stitch would probably work. You just try it out and see. It has to be wide, and the stitch has to be wide enough to cover the satin cording, all three pieces, if you are using satin cording. So now I'm going to go back to my foot here. And on the screen, it did recommend that I use the integrated walking foot, the IDT, and it does recommend that I use, no, actually it doesn't recommend that I use stabilizer. I'm surprised. I'm going to put stabilizer under there because I think it'll work better with stabilizer on it. So I've got my satin cording threaded through the foot. I'm going to put my needle down. Oh, I hit the needle threader. That's not what I meant to do. Put my needle down, and then I'm just going to start sewing, and the foot keeps the satin cord right where it needs to be. Oh, but I have to load the right foot. That's why it didn't say to use stabilizer, because I did not load the decorative stitch. I told you about the stitch, but I didn't load it. So now I'm going to load that stitch. Then this is going to make more sense on the screen. It's recommending stabilizer, and it's not recommending the IDT. That's what I was thinking it should, but and it did say the IDT because I had the straight stitch loaded. Now that I have the correct stitch loaded, I'm just going to start stitching. And then I'll cut it and show you what it looks like. So it ends up with this very nice decorative effect. Oh, I did not have the right camera on. So I'm gonna demo that again, but you're gonna see the end result right now, that it has this nice decorative effect. And I am gonna reload this foot so you can see what I was talking about when I do the stitching. So I'm gonna put the satin cording back into the foot so you can see it actually stitch. So I think that if you have floss, as I do, that having both feet is a nice thing to have, because you can have different types of effects on your projects. So it's nice to have both the 7/9 hole cording foot and the 3-hole yarn foot. So I have struggling to get my foot back on there, so you can see it stitch. There's probably going to be a little bit of a glitch there in the middle, but I'm just going to start stitching. And of course my needle became unthreaded while I was sticking that foot on with all the cording. So now you get to see the wonderful needle threader. Okay, now we can stitch. So there's a lot of different effects that you can get based on the color and type of yarn or satin cording that you use. One of my favorites is to use white satin cording, or I'm sorry, white and pink satin cording and gold metallic thread. That is a really nice effect. So that's what that looks like. And that's what I had all along the sides of my wall hanging. And I'm going to show that to you again when I find, here we go, find the picture. So that's all along the sides here. And so it gives it this extra bling on the sides. Then I decided to, as I made this, I decided that I wanted to have it hang from a rod. So I needed to, of course, make some tabs at the top. And just to give you some ideas about hanging, These dowel rods are very inexpensive. I bought, let's see, where did I put it? Here they are. I bought a bag of these rods and the finials, the ends, that fit on these rods. So when you buy the rods, if you buy them separately, you have to make sure that the hole in the finial is the diameter of the rod, of course, so that they fit. And then the beauty of this is when you have the whole bag like that, you can then spray paint it whatever color you want that goes with your project. So, or you could use wood stain, you know, do whatever you want to do as far as making this go with your project. Like I have some that are done. I have one from Hanukkah that I made, and I thought, you know, a black rod looked much better. So you can, you know, change it to match your project. And then because I spray painted this silver, I wanted to add something more. I wanted to add more bling to the project. So I took some buttons that were white and I spray painted them silver to give it some extra pop and interest. Now, I wouldn't spray paint a button that was going to be on a garment because I would be afraid that the friction of buttoning and unbuttoning the garment would wear the paint off. But on a wall hanging, there's not going to be any friction, so I thought I was safe to use the spray paint. So I wanted to share with you a foot that if you're going to be putting on a lot of buttons, our sew-on button foot makes the job a lot faster. If I had to just sew on one button, I would probably just do it by hand. But if I have a whole bunch of buttons that I want to put on, particularly if it's on a heavy coat, I would use the sew-on buttonhole. So I'm going to show you how you would do that. So I've got my wall hanging, and I want to put a couple more buttons on the bottom. So I'm going to change the camera to where you can see, and I'm going to put on my buttonhole foot. And the buttonhole foot looks like this. And it does come with a tool that allows you to grab the button and position it. Now getting these feet on and not knocking over my camera is always a feat. So the other advantage of using the sew-on buttonhole is it has this white plastic doohickey thing. And what that does is when you push it forward, it's going to create a looser shank. So when you sew a button onto a garment, say you're sewing this button onto this fabric, the shank is the part of the thread that is holding it down. Now, if you are sewing a big button on a heavy wool coat that you're going to be buttoning through, you know, pretty heavy fabric, you want that shank to be loose. So you want that button to kind of ride above the fabric, because otherwise it'll be very difficult to button. And with this white piece of this doohickey, I'm sure it has an official name, but I don't remember what it is. If I push it forward, the further I push it forward, the looser the shank's going to be. So it's nice to have that option, but we want it real tight because this is not a functional button. It's just decorative. So the first thing you do is you take your button and you're going to slide it between this black metal and the steel, and that holds the button right in place, like so. And I could have used the button grabber tool. I would if it had been a smaller button. It really helps with the smaller buttons, but this size button, I'm fine just using my hands. So I've previously made a mark on my project where I want this button to go. So I'm going to put it over that mark. And I'm going to show you where the stitch is on the icon. So if I go back into my stitch menu, It's going to be in utility, which is the first category. And I believe it's the third category. Yes, there's my buttonhole stitch. Doesn't look like much on the screen. However, if you open up Stitch Edit, you'll see that there are some things that you can alter about the way this will be stitching out. The zigzag-like icon, you're going to leave it at the default setting unless the holes in the button are bigger or more close together than the typical. So I'm going to show you how you determine that right now. So when I go back to my button, I get it in the right place here. I will always use the hand crank and just manually make sure that my needle is going to clear the buttons. It's going to go in one hole, and then it's going to go in the next hole, and it's not going to hit the button. And I keep my finger there so that the button doesn't move. So that tells me that that distance from left to right is correct. And so, and I had my finger right in the way. I was holding the button. But basically, as I'm using the hand crank, it's going from one hole to the next. And so I know that the distance from left to right is good. But I have to keep my finger here so that the button does not move. Then going back over to my screen, so I know this number is correct because the needle went to both holes just perfectly. Now, the 8 is the number of times it's now going to stitch across the two buttonholes. But since I took my hand away, I just want to just double check. Yeah, the button did not move. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is on the top of my machine, I'm going to touch the fix button, and then I'm just going to touch the start button. And it's first going to fix, and now it's going to sew that button in place. Now we have 4 holes, so then I would cut my thread using the cutter, and then I'm going to pull it out, and then I'm going to do the other 2 holes. So I got to get my button back in there. And I'm going to put my foot down, and I'm going to again test to make sure that my needle is going to clear both holes. And that looks good. So I'll keep my finger there to hold the button in place. Sorry that you can't see when I do that. And I'm going to touch my fix button, then the start. So it's going to fix it, and now it's going to sew it down. And touch the cutter and pull it out and just cut my threads, and then I have my button sewn on. So if you're doing a whole bunch of buttons, it is really nice to have that sew on button foot, and it accommodates buttons of all different sizes because you can change the stitch so that it will accommodate buttons where the holes are further apart or closer together. So pretty nice. So it looks like I've got a question. I see that you have overlapped the ribbon braid in the corners. Did you have any problem with sewing over the second layer of ribbon? I did not. We have that really increased piercing power in the icon. You know, it's almost double the previous models. So it just went right over those. And it's not even ribbon, it's cording. So it's actually, you know, thicker than ribbon. And let's see if I can show you a corner. It's not going to really be in focus, but it's pretty thick there. So no problem at all. It just went over it and sewed through it. And the reason I did that is I wanted that decorative stitch to, I've got it upside down. I wanted the decorative stitch to sort of frame the whole piece. And because I was using this cording, I didn't think it would look good if I tried to take a corner. Maybe there's a way to do a corner with that stitch, but it's a lot easier if you just, you know, you overlap it like that. So the other thing I did with this, that I didn't mention is that I chose not to bind it like a regular quilt. Basically, I wanted to save time because I knew I had this class to teach today. But instead of doing it, it does have batting on the inside and it has a back side. Instead of putting the quilt sandwiched together and then binding the edges to finish them off, what I did was I have two pieces of fabric to kind of give you a visual so that, you know I'm very visual, and sometimes when people explain things to me verbally, it doesn't make sense until I see something. So if this were my piece, what I did is I took the back side of my wall hanging and the front side and put the right sides together. So I've got two right sides together. And then I had the batting on the other side. Then I stitched all the way around, leaving a gap on the bottom, and then turned it right sides out. So kind of like making a bag where you do the lining and the outer part of the bag, you go all the way around, and then you turn it out through a hole in the lining. Same sort of thing. So I stitched all the way around, leaving a gap here, and when I turned it right sides out, I've got my I've got the right sides of the fabric on the top and the bottom. Of course, I put the tabs on the inside so that when I stitched them and it was all stitched together, then they would be there to be utilized for to hang the piece. So that's a really quick way to finish off a wall hanging as opposed to doing binding. Certainly it would be very fast to do binding with our quilt binder, but since I had already framed this with a different type of fabric, which is kind of like a wide binding, I thought that I could get away with just flipping it. And then I did some top stitching along the edge all the way around. Now, as I said, this does have batting in it. Another thing I did to make it lay flat is when I did the stitching all the way around, on the batting side, I trimmed the batting very close to the stitching, so that would not make a bulky seam, because otherwise it'd be very fat on the edges with the batting. So if the seam was right across here, then I cut a little bit of the batting off, so right to the stitch line, so that it would lay flatter, basically. Okay, so that's the wall hanging. Then the other project that I made to share with you, I'm going to show you a picture here. I made this New Year banner. So again, I am going to flip to the software to show you how I did this. Now, you could certainly do this right on the icon. Let's see, let's go into the icon and see what font I would probably use then. I happen to like that font in the software, but if we were going to do it right on the icon, I go into embroidery. I know that there is a very large font. Let's get rid of this design here. And so I'd go into my fonts, and the font sizes are on the sides. You know, actually, here's a font that looks a lot like the one that I made on the wall hanging. The wall hanging one was called Art Deco, and this is called Ellipse, but it looks a lot like that. Now, I think that's the one font that's very large, so that would be the one that I would probably choose. So you could go with a 60 or 50 size, and then just start typing out your message. And let's get rid of this. So you could certainly do that wall banner, but I again would have made these right on the icon. I would make these individual files so I could move them around. And you could do it, it would just look different because it's a different font. I prefer the other font, so that's why I did it in the software. But you could definitely do it right on the icon itself. So let's get rid of this. And I will show you how I did it on the software. So I'm going to share my screen for just a minute and go back to the software. So I'm going to delete this design. And for this banner, let's get rid of this. No, let's stay there. Oh, I'm clicking on the wrong things here. Go back. So for the banner, I would go into letter, and I need to get rid of happy here. Well, I could actually keep happy because we're going to do happy again. I went through and looked at the fonts, and for my taste, I liked the font called President. So I would go, I'm not going to look through all the fonts again. I'm just going to go to the font manager and type in President. You could probably get it with just Prez. Yep, there it is. It's a nice big font. I did look through all the fonts. First of all, I searched for fonts that were over 50 millimeters, and then chose from the fonts that I knew that were large. So I'm going to choose that. And basically what I did is I just added a bunch of letters until I got my whole screen filled up with Happy New Year. And I'll show you what it looks like. I'm thinking I can probably find it here. I thought I had it open. Let's insert. And of course it's not there. So I'm going to show you basically how I made it. I just kept adding letters. I've still got individual letters, so I can take this, I can click on the H, bring it way over there, click on the A. I did use upper and lower case, but for our purposes, I'm just going to show you how I did it. I kept adding more and more letters and trying to get them in there really close so that on my hoop, I could fit all the letters. And I believe I have a picture of what it looked like when I got them all there. Yes. So I will show you what that looked like. So I'm going to unshare my screen. And this is what it looked like when it was all stitched out. Now, there's a couple steps that I forgot to mention. Before I stitched it out, I decided that I wanted it to be stiff in order for it to hang properly. So I pulled out the fabric stiffener that I had on hand, which was Terrio Magic. There are other fabric stiffeners that just happens to be one that I am familiar with. And I sprayed my top fabric, my stabilizer, and my back fabric. So I sprayed that sandwich together, and then I had to let it dry. Then I stitched out my letters, and these letters are rather large, and they are satin stitches, which means that these the satin stitches, because the letters are large, the satin stitches are very large, which if it were a garment, I would be worried about them catching on something. With a wall hanging, less so. But just to be on the safe side, I also sprayed the thread. Once it was embroidered, I sprayed it again with the Terrio Magic, so that not only was the fabric stiff, the satin stitches were not going anywhere. They were not going to shred. They weren't going to, they were going to stay together and behave themselves to be stiff letters to hang on the wall, basically. So Then what I did is I cut all these out and then just sewed the pieces together so that it would make something that looks like this. So it made my banner. So super easy project to do. Oh, the only other thing I would mention is that I use the same color thread on the top and the bottom in case the letters curled at all, or they, you know, they with the wind, so you wouldn't see the back. So the back side would look almost like the front side. It doesn't look quite as good, but it's pretty close. So you just have to be careful when you cut the letters out that you don't cut the thread, of course. But it is a pretty quick project to decorate your wall with. And it could, you know, it's transferable to birthdays and other holidays as well. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, which is going to be the resource for these files for you to download, and if you do want to download and do these projects, I want to show you Project Creator. Now, when we develop these wireless capable machines like the Creative Icon, we have these cell phone apps that integrate with that. But we also have a program that's online that you can use on your computer to document all of your projects. So I documented these projects, not really thoroughly, but since you've watched the video, I'm sure you can just follow my sort of limited directions after you've watched the video and download the files there. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to share my screen again. And what you would, to go to Project Creator, you go to mysonet.com. And then if you have a MySonet account and you're logged in, under Tools, you'll have these choices. And one of them is Project Creator. So I click on Project Creator, and it will take me to my projects that I have documented, or I can create a new one. So in the comments section or the captions, there is a link to both of these projects for you to go in and download the files should you want to. But I'm going to show you what a great resource Project Creator is. And all you need is a MySonet account. So if I were to create a new project, I would click on Create a New Project. I would give it a name. Let's say New Year. And in order to accommodate my cameras, my computer is way far away from me, so my typing is even worse than normal. Then I can add an image. I had put this image in on one of them. So it will add the image of the project. You have to put in some kind of description. I'm just going to type something in there. And then you type in the supplies that you use. And then you type in some directions. And then you can add design files, as I did, or stitch files, or a little video if you want a video link, or more pictures. And then when you're all done, you save the project. And then when you click on Share Project, it will give you a link that you can share this project with anybody who has a computer. So I'm going to go back so you can see one that's actually done. So I've got these projects that I just showed you. And so I'm going to click on this one. And so yeah, I gave it a name. I uploaded the picture. I put down the supplies that are necessary. And then I added the design files. Now I added the ones without the appliques on there. You certainly could add them yourself after you watched the Facebook Live. I saved the project, and then I clicked on here and it gave me a link. So that link is in the captions. And what is really cool is that now I get to go back to my other camera. And I forgot to unshare my screen. So get rid of that. And let's see where we are. So now you're seeing my icon. when I go back into embroidery and I go into my cloud, I now have a project creator file. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And when I touch that, I have my 2 projects there from using Project Creator on my computer, and I can open it up and it'll look really nice and professional. It's just like the other tutorials that are in the icon. And if I touch content, there's my file. I can load it. And if I were embroidery, it would load. And so, just by doing that on the Project Creator web page, let's go back into embroidery so you can see what that looks like. Oh, I touched sewing mode again. Embroidery. I want to be in embroidery. Here we go. Now we're cooking with gas. Now I'm going to touch content and load this. I don't know why I'm in sewing mode. Well, a little bit of glitch there, but generally you can definitely download the file. If you can't, you could download the file from Project Creator. You go to that Project Creator link, and right on that page, you should be able to download the files, the design files. And then by following how I describe things on the Facebook Live today, you should be able to duplicate the project. So the Project Creator is really great for documenting all those things, the projects that you make, and where all the files necessary that you use for the design, and so that in 6 months, when you've forgotten how you did it, you can go through Project Creator and you'll know how you did it. Also, you can share it with your friends that say you're working on a quilt together. You could all have access to the Project Creator instructions and files so that you can work on that quilt together, even though you're not physically together. So it's a really nice resource. All you need is a My Sewnet account in order to get into the website and to create your project. And if you don't have a wireless capable machine, you can still download the files onto your computer and transfer them however you would transfer a file, normally your design files, to your current embroidery machine. Certainly it's easier if you have a wireless machine because you just transfer it with the push of a button. But you could save it to your computer, copy it to a USB drive, and put the USB drive in your embroidery machine. So we have about 5 minutes left. Any questions about anything that I went over, or anything you'd like to see in more depth? I guess not. I will just wait a couple of minutes to see if anybody types any questions. It's been a pleasure doing these Facebook Lives. I'm so glad that you decided to join us today. And I hope that all of you have a very happy, healthy, and safe holiday season, and that you get to spend time with your loved ones. I will be doing another Facebook Live in the beginning of the year on January 6th on sewing and embroidering with Minky and fleece. So we're going to do some fun stuff with Minky and fleece. It's that time of year where you want to have that fuzzy warm stuff next to your skin. So I'm going to be doing that. I have a love for that kind of soft material, and plus I just had my first grandson, so Minky's right up my alley now. So I guess we don't have any more questions. So I'm going to say again, thank you for joining me, and hopefully I will see you again in January. So happy holidays and happy sewing.